in from various fields of the biochar world for your professional development. We're very fortunate to have you here. I want to introduce, first of all, Katie Meenan, who will be your administrator here today, and she has some notes on conduct during the meeting.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to April's Char Talk. Simon will be our guest presenter today. This meeting will be recorded, and I will share a recap email at the end. We do ask that you stay muted throughout the presentation. If you come off of mute, I will be muting you. And we welcome questions at the end. We will save time for a Q&A. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we will save them for later. And I will be adding a few reminders in the chat, links to Minnesota Biochar Initiative, and some information if you would like to join the email list. But I will pass it back over to Jim so we can get started.
Well, fantastic, and welcome here to the May Char Talk. Apologize for being a month or a week off here, but we'll be back on schedule next month due to various circumstances. But we're very happy to have Simon Manley here today from the sunny UK Islands, United Kingdom today. And before we go on that, I have an obligatory message that I have to send. Is that remember in September 2025 that the U.S. Biochar Initiative's North American Biochar Conference will be held in Minneapolis on September 15th to the 18th. And make your reservations now, and we will drop in the link for the conference or for USBI and how to register for the conference or sponsorships for the conference. Katie and I both work for the city of Minneapolis. We will be the host city for the conference, and Minnesota Biochar Initiative is the local partner for MNBI. But the U.S. Biochar Initiative is putting this on, and we look forward to seeing you here in Minnesota. It looks to be a great event. But starting off here today, I want to introduce us. Whoops, we got a mute. Thank you. Okay, there we go. Simon Manley has worked in the biochar sector since 2008, and he has direct experience working on biochar projects around the world, the development of small-scale biochar production equipment and biochar-based products for various commercial markets, including agriculture and high-value horticulture. Most recently, Simon has worked in the field of methodology development, leading the consortium that delivered VM0044, Vera's methodology for biochar utilization in soil and non-soil applications. Simon is currently the director of CDR for Sylvera, the leading carbon data platform, where he leads a team that develops rating frameworks for the assessment of biochar projects for CDR market investors and commercial carbon credits buyers. With that, I want to hand it over to Simon. And if you have questions along the way, put them in the chat. Otherwise, we will go in at the end. And Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Katie, for giving me the opportunity to speak to everybody on the webinar today. I appreciate that it was down to my schedule that we had to change the week, so I'm extremely grateful for you guys for accommodating me in that way. So let's begin. So if we could go to the first slide, please, or the next slide rather. So in the spring of 2008, I joined a company called Carbon Gold. It was one of the first commercial biochar companies in the world. My first day in the office was sitting on an aeroplane traveling from London Heathrow to Belize in Central America, armed with the first edition of the Biochar for Environmental Management Manual, which was undoubtedly the heaviest item in my hand luggage. Traveling all the way over to Central America to work with a bunch of cocoa growers to try and convince them to process their tree prunings, which they'd been pruning their trees to try and improve airflow through the orchards of their cacao to avert issues associated with fungal disease, something called black pod. And those tree prunings were sitting on the orchard floor, and it was the idea of the founder of one of the customers of the growers cooperative to process those prunings into biochar and use them to improve the soil in which the cacao trees were growing. We had a license to build the Adam retort. So the old timers amongst you might remember this was an invention of Chris Adam. It's a brick-built kiln for pyrolysis. You can see two versions of that in the pictures in this slide here. And we spent a very sort of productive and interesting sort of month in Belize building these kilns and processing tree prunings into biochar. The next slide, please. This project thankfully evolved quite successfully. We were teamed up with the Toledo Cacao Growers Association. The project was funded with public money through the United Nations, and then with private money through a UK chocolate company called Green and Blacks, which had been bought by Cadbury's, which was then bought by Kraft, and then eventually became Mondelez. We developed our kilns away from the Adam retort to the metal round kilns that you can see there in the top left of the slide. And the project ran for several years, leading to some very interesting insights around not only improving soil and soil health for cacao production, but also the first stages of methodology development for carbon capture and storage through biochar production. So if you could move to the next slide, please. That was very much the beginning of my journey through the biochar world, and it saw me doing small-scale, project development in various countries around the world, the manufacture and distribution of small-scale production equipment, the creation of biochar-based products, mainly as soil products, and also methodology development. And these methodologies being the guidelines for processing or converting your activities on the ground to create tradable carbon assets through the production of biochar. In fact, we developed the first methodology for biochar back in 2009, which was rejected by the VCS on the grounds of permanence. So it was very satisfying to be part of the team that delivered VM44 for the VCS, which was finally registered and published in August 2022. So I'm now at Sylvera several years later, where I'm the director of carbon dioxide removal. Sylvera is a UK-based company. We have offices also in New York and Singapore. We're a carbon data platform, and as the slide suggests, we're on a mission to incentivize investment into real climate action. We basically provide data, ratings, insights, and tools to subscribers to our platform who are investors and customers, so investors in carbon projects and customers of carbon projects and the resulting carbon credits, to assist them to navigate their way through successfully the incredibly and increasingly complex environment which is the voluntary carbon market. And you can see an example of some of the customers that we work for at the bottom there. And biochar is a big project focus area for us. If you can move to the next slide, please. So at the kind of heart of our offering is something called a rating. We call it a platform rating because it sits on our platform. If you go to the next slide, please. And what a project rating does, the best way to think about it is what Standard & Poor's or Moody's is for the financial services sector, Sylvera is for the voluntary carbon market. We provide ratings which give a sort of consolidated and accumulated score on the quality and integrity of carbon, well, in our case, carbon removal projects for the benefit of both buyers and investors. The way that we do this is we create an assessment framework which examines in detail the different aspects of that project. So we look very closely at the carbon score. So what the carbon score there does is it takes your gross, and when I say CDR, I mean carbon dioxide removal. So it takes your gross CDR calculations, and typically from the volume of biochar that you produced, which combined with its chemical and mineralogical makeup and the weight and moisture content. And then we examine as to how you have applied the emissions associated with the production process. And that's typically we have created our own life cycle analysis tool for biochar projects, and we utilize that to examine the project developer's data to see whether we come up with the same score as you, the developer, does, and then highlight if there is a delta and therefore a risk in overcrediting or overstating the carbon credit forecast. Those with experience in sort of carbon markets will know about the concept of additionality. We look at this very closely. What this basically assesses for is, would the project be commercially viable in the absence of the revenue opportunity from the sale of carbon credits? Now, many biochar producers, if you've been in the game long enough, will remember that it's only relatively recently that biochar has been recognized as a negative emissions technology by the IPCC. And a lot of the old school biochar producers have had to make a commercially viable business out of all of the non-carbon benefits of biochar. And so to present a set of sort of accounts to auditors such as us, showing that your business is not profitable in the absence or without the carbon revenue, it can sometimes be a challenge. But that's what we're looking out for. So we need, otherwise, if the project would be happening anyway, then what's the point in giving it the carbon revenue through the sale of carbon credits? We look very closely at permanence. So while we all understand how biochar works from a carbon capture perspective, how long is that carbon actually going to be removed from the atmosphere? How long is it going to stay out of the carbon cycle? Now, this is an issue which still bubbles on. I mentioned earlier on the VCS methodology back in 2009 being rejected on the grounds of permanence. And still, durability is also for permanence is being discussed with this new concept of inertinite and random reflectance being used to measure it. So it's a very interesting and sort of topical area for analysis. And then finally, we look at the co-benefits, of which there are many and various, of course, for biochar, mainly focused around soil application, but increasingly as we understand the benefits of incorporating biochar into industrial materials like concrete or things like asphalt, for example, there are some co-benefits associated with that as well. All of that analysis combines into a letter rating score, and then we typically publish that or put that onto our platform for the benefit of our customers and investors. Next slide, please. In order to conduct a rating, we need to develop a framework, and every project type is different, as you can imagine. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We have to develop frameworks that are specifically tailored around the project type itself, biochar is no exception to that rule. And we have developed frameworks for all sorts of different project types as well. But on the subject of biochar, if you move to the next slide, please. We have developed certain aspects, very specific and detailed around sort of biochar project design. One of the key aspects is our in-house life cycle assessment model, which we have developed in association with the University College of London and had it peer reviewed. And we utilize this to assess basically the carbon accounting rigor that underpins the data that's being presented for verification by the project developer to the verifying body. And it's essential that these calculations are done to the highest level of accuracy. We also have an independent decay rate model, and as I indicated earlier on, that includes everything from this slightly older, more traditional approach of looking at HC ratios, the proponent of which is of course from Wolf, and then the slightly newer approach using inertinite, which of course looks at random reflectance and other aspects as well. I'm very happy to get into that in a little bit more detail, perhaps in the Q&A. So next slide, please. So why are ratings important for CDR project developers? Well, they are important because they give a rating on the platform gives access to the subscribers to our platform, in other words, customers, investors, access to the actual project itself, and acts as like a sort of stamp of quality and an independent assessment around the value and the quality of the credits that are being produced. A single source document it does save a lot of time for project developers as well, who sometimes get involved in these what are called RFPs, requests for proposals, and that can be very time consuming. So to have a single source document that can be applicable to all the different people asking for information about your project is also extremely helpful and streamlines your due diligence process. And it allows you as the project developer to stand out as a high quality project in an increasingly crowded marketplace, attempting to find routes to market for your carbon credits. Moving on to the next slide, please. Now, this quite literally is the money shot, and what we have found in our analysis of ARR, so afforestation projects, of which there are obviously many, many more than biochar projects in the world, is that a rating, if for example, a project has a rating of B versus a project that has a rating of A, there is a material increase in the value of the credit that they can put onto the marketplace. Now, I'm not saying that this is applicable to biochar now. I personally don't think there's enough liquidity in the marketplace for this analysis to be valid. However, this is just an indication of the value that is sort of allocated to a rating for a carbon credit project in the marketplace now. And I ideally hope that at some stage there'll be sufficient number of project developers out there, projects that have been assessed and credits that are on the marketplace that would allow for this kind of analysis to be as relevant to biochar projects as it is to a reforestation project. So that's sort of the ultimate goal and the justification for sort of having a rating. Moving on, please. Now, I was having a conversation with a former colleague who is now a biochar project developer just the other day when I was talking about my new role at Sylvera, and he was saying, yes, we would love to have a rating and to put that into our data room to support our fundraising efforts. However, if the truth be known, Simon, what I'm actually being asked by investors is something quite different. They want to know, have I got an offtake contract for the biochar that I'm producing? What's the security of my feedstock supply? And what level of technology risk are you exposed to? And I don't see those questions being addressed in the rating that you've just been talking about. And so I think that just speaks to the fact that while a rating is incredibly valuable, it's really better suited to a project which is developing and verifying and selling credits already. If we could move on to the next slide, please. What we have found as kind of just a level set into the market, working in the CDR space, again, the carbon dioxide removal space, most project developers have not yet moved into their sort of towards their first verification event. In other words, they haven't yet produced any credits and sold any credits. We did a survey with CDR.FYI, an industry commentator on the CDR sector a few months ago, and it found that of the suppliers that we surveyed, only 55% have actually, 55% have not actually sold a single credit, and 73% have yet to deliver one. Yet, at the same time, 64% of those suppliers are hoping to raise money in 2025 and 85% in 2026. So, and how they're going to do that is either through raising it through equity or through debt. Now, as you can imagine, this is a tricky landscape for raising money. You've got absolutely no track record to lean on or to demonstrate to investors and buyers. And you're moving from, well, I mean, equity is difficult enough, but as soon as you move into the environment of project finance and debt, which is a much more risk-averse funding route, the investors and buyers have got very little to sort of hold on to and to go on when it comes to the presentation of your project to as you move towards that final investment decision, that FID. So this is where we come in with a different sort of type of analysis, which is specifically designed to help project developers navigate their way through this rather tricky sort of knowledge gap, no man's land, pre-verification, but needing to raise funds. If you can move to the next slide, please. So looking at this in a bit more detail, and this is if there are any project developers out there, of which I presume there are quite a few, I'm sure you'll recognise what's being illustrated in this graph. In other words, it's a bit of a catch-22. Project developers need that upfront funding in order to get projects off the ground. However, it's only going to be once the project is established and implemented, then do you start generating revenue. So that presents a funding gap, well established in any kind of project types, but it can be an enormous headache to CDR project developers who simply don't have a track record to fall back on, and to sort of convince buyers and investors to put money into the project. Moving on to the next slide, please. So we recognise this, and I think what the off-takers and the banks and the investors that we speak to on a regular basis who are subscribing and utilising our platform are asking these questions of the project developers. What's the delivery risk? What's the integrity risk? Is the project going to issue the credits they said when they said? And it's very difficult. Other than it's just because we don't want it to be a leap of faith. These decisions need to be based on sort of good, accurate analysis to the best of our ability. And so, moving on to the next slide, please. What we have done is we've developed a sort of an assessment product, which we call a pre-issuance rating, which looks at not only the integrity component of the project, in other words, all of those quality criteria that I was talking about earlier on, but additional assessments which really get into the delivery and execution risk of the project itself, and then its future value as it presents credits into the marketplace. And I'm going to get into some of the details of that sort of delivery module now. So if you move to the next slide, please, Katie. So what does delivery risk actually mean for biochar projects? What kind of questions are being asked? And, as I sort of work through the next few slides, I'd just like people to have in mind that the question that we're attempting to provide insight around is the project going to deliver the credits they said when they said? In other words, you're saying you're going to produce 1,000 tons a year, every year for the next 30 years. Is that going to happen on time? And are you going to deliver to the volume that you're hoping to raise money against? So moving on to the next slide. So what are the different components of the risk factors that I think it's important to provide some insights around? The first is around supply chain risk, and this is typically the security of your feedstock supply. So in certain environments around the world, biomass-based feedstock is strongly competed over for all sorts of different sort of utilizations and end uses, not least for incineration, especially with the evolution of the bioeconomy and also sort of different CDR types such as BECCS. So how secure is the feedstock supply of the project developer, and is that locked into a purchase agreement that sees the supply of feedstock that will allow them to produce the biochar which will generate the credits that they're forecasting? That's incredibly important, obviously. Secondly, how consistent rather is that material going to be? It's unlikely to be sort of virgin biomass of a uniform sort of format and size with a consistent moisture content throughout the season, throughout the year. So what is the consistency of that material in terms of format and origin, and how is that going to impact your production capacity over the course of the year? Another incredibly important thing to sort of understand when attempting to answer that question again, which is the project going to deliver the credits they said when they said? Moving on, please. And next is technology risk. Now, I'm sure you guys have had the same experience, but when looking for biochar production technology, the number of equipment manufacturers who presented their new shiny machine of CAD drawings is well, I've seen a few of them. Let me say that. Now that normally means that they haven't yet actually built the machine, and if they have, it's certainly sort of in beta stage on their development site. Quite often, those machines are being sold as if they were off the shelf. Yet when they're delivered to the project developer site, the project developer is carrying a huge amount of the development risk associated with getting that getting that equipment sort of operational. So the questions that we need to ask is, what level of development risk is the project developer exposed to? How many commercial installations has this equipment provider actually sort of carried out to match this project design? It's all very well, oh yeah, we've done sort of virgin wood chip of sort of 5% moisture content in, let's say, Texas. However, if I'm now in the rainforest processing cocoa tree prunings or wood shavings of a completely different format, how's that equipment going to perform in that environment, and how's that going to impact my production capacity? And then let's be real. The production stats that you'll see from the specification of the equipment itself, it normally says it's going to run at around 7,200 to 8,000 hours per year. How realistic is that? It's only a few very skilled project developers that are able to get up to that production capacity. And if they do so, it certainly takes them a year or so. So is that factored properly into, again, the forecasting of the production of the credits? Next slide, please. And then end-use application. As we know, the end-use application, the possible end-use applications for biochar are many and various. What started off as mainly soil application has evolved into concrete additive, asphalt additive, into industrial materials, as well as all sorts of other sort of niche end-use applications as well. And this is increasingly happening in Europe, I'm not sure about in the US, but the biochar being used as a substitute for coke in metallurgy. So there are no carbon credits here. In this instance, is being burnt. Now, you might get an avoidance credit from the reduction of the coke that you're using, but it's certainly not, it doesn't fall within sort of the CDR certification framework. So each of these end-use applications, not only do they have an impact on the number of credits that you can produce at the point of verification, because they have fundamental impacts on your life cycle assessment, the emissions associated with your overall carbon calculation. But all of them will have different commercial outcomes, right? It might be that the person wanting to utilize your biochar as a coke substitute is willing to pay you double the price that a farmer is to put it on his agricultural land. So that's a tricky decision, and which way are you going to go, and how's that going to sit with the resulting carbon credits that you can generate off the back of the different end-use applications. So all of these need to be taken into consideration when looking at the project design and the commercial environment in which it's operating. Again, because it will impact. Is the project going to deliver the credits they said when they said? Okay, next slide, please. And then methodology risk, and I touched on this earlier on, and this really speaks to the whole permanence piece. The jobbing project biochar project developer now looking to get a project off the ground is faced with a confusing environment of methodologies and registries in front of him or her. You probably would have heard of these: isometric, Puro. There's Sylvera, of course. One Shot, Reverse is a new one, and then Carbon Standards International coming out of the European Biochar Certificate. Now, all of these have got different methodologies. They all present slightly different flavors in terms of their approach to quantification and eligible project design. And they all have different business models. So which one you're going to choose has a fundamental impact on, the project design and how you approach it. Now, we're all in the business of breaking the carbon cycle and producing biochar for long-term carbon storage. But how is that CDR actually going to be calculated? And now, as you know, in the last couple of years, a new approach to permanence has emerged. It's called inertinite, and the main sort of scientific proponent of which is a chap called Senai. And it does present a very attractive alternative to the more traditional sort of HC ratio approach to CDR, offering much higher rates of carbon removal over a much longer time period. And so it is understandably very attractive to project developers. It's not yet founded in what I would call best available science, and it still needs to be kicked around by the scientific community a lot more, in my view, before it can be considered sort of eligible for use universally. That said, a couple of the methodologies or a couple of registries already allow project developers to use it. Puro does not. Isometric does, for example, and so the methodology choice that you go for will have again a fundamental impact on the number of credits that you're producing because of the quantification approach that you're using. Next slide, please. And then finally, policy risk. What we have on the left of the slide here are the voluntary carbon market standards, as I've just been talking about, standards and registries. As some of you, I'm sure, are aware, biochar is at a level of maturity from a project type perspective that it is now being considered for its sort of migration into the compliance markets. And into the carbon compliance markets. Now, these are, and California Cap and Trade is one of the world's most famous ones. The European or the EU ETS is the world's largest. In the UK, we also have an ETS, and there are also burgeoning compliance markets in both Singapore and Japan. All of these markets have acknowledged that CDR can play a part in the sort of the trading scheme in some capacity, and in some cases, biochar has been sort of identified as a viable project type. So the smart money is on the project developers. Now, let me just put this into context. The size of these compliance markets is hundreds of times larger than the voluntary carbon market. So we're talking billions of euros or dollars worth of carbon transactions taking place in the or many billions in the compliance market, whereas the voluntary carbon market at its peak, I think, was valued anywhere between 2 and 3 billion a couple of years ago before it took a bit of a nosedive. So the transition into the compliance market is a very clear and attractive demand signal for the scale of CDR project types, and biochar being one of them. And as I was saying, the smart money is in the project developer that can align his choice of methodology in the voluntary carbon market as closely as possible to the methodologies that are currently being developed and evolved for the compliance market. And so a question that we need to ask is, are you as a project developer successfully lining yourself up for this transition or this migration from one to the other? Because the real action will be in the compliance markets as and when they adopt CDR and biochar as a project type. Okay, I think that's, if you go on to the next slide, please. So that just gives you a flavour of some of the factors and the risks that we would look at in what we would call a pre-issuance report, and to try and line up with the questions that that you as a project developer may well be being asked by the customers and investors that you're approaching for funding or for offtake contracts. We move to the next slide, please. And what that results in is an assessment and a report which basically flags the project's risks right now in its current design and identifies a set of remedial actions addressing some of the risks that we have identified through the analysis of the factors that we've just been running through. And we then suggest a set of remedial actions which, if implemented over time, will result in a much higher quality and higher rating for the project when it comes to the point of verification. And then what we'll do is we'll then check in with the project on a quarterly or a 6-monthly basis to ensure that those remedial actions are being put into place, and therefore you're on the pathway to that sort of higher rating, and then therefore the higher quality and integrity project at the end of the day. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that has been sort of a useful overview of what we do and how we operate within the sort of the biochar space. And I very much welcome any questions from the floor.
Well, Simon, thank you very much. This is very informative. Really get a good understanding, and particularly between the voluntary and the mandated markets, compliance markets. Where do you see, how transportable are these credits between the markets? So someone in the United States wanting to put a credit, were they able to use their credits in those compliance markets?
Compliance markets tend to be defined by geography, so it's unlikely that if you've got a project based in the States, that you'll be able to sell that credit into the EU ETS, for example. There are obviously, and you will have heard of Article 6, 6.2 and 6.4, so there are infrastructures currently in place or being developed now, which allows for the sort of they're called ITMO, internationally transferable mitigation outcomes. So the transfer of credits from one jurisdiction to the other But those are markets that are being sort of evolved now. So right now, if you were a biochar project developer in the US, producing credits through one of the voluntary carbon market registries, could you sell those credits into the compliance markets? No. Plus, the US, you guys have your own unique set of challenges when it comes to that anyway. You need to be participating in an internationally recognized climate action scheme anyway.
Oh, that's what I was thinking of that. Thank you for clarifying that answer. Going again, this is if you have a question for Simon, please go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get you in order. We do have one comment from Muriel about the potential for using crowdfunding for upfront capital.
Yeah, crowdfunding is an extremely effective means of raising upfront capital, and I would strongly encourage it. Back in my carbon gold days, we did 2 rounds of crowdfunding very successfully, raising, I think, in the region of 300 and then 700, or the other way around, £1,000 to sort of help growth capital for the business. So yeah, that is absolutely possible and a very compelling route. And the good thing about crowdfunding for biochar projects is that biochar has a very attractive narrative around it as a project type, delivering some very compelling co-benefits which could appeal to that kind of the profile of that type of investor.
Fantastic. And we have a question from John Adams. Go ahead, John.
Yes, hello.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so John Adams, the city of Appleton, Wisconsin, USA. And so, we're a municipality, looking at a potential generation of biochar through one of our municipal operations, which is wastewater, and converting 26,000 US tons of biosolids, plus we now understand we need to add wood biomass to it. But right now we're in a process of kind of scoping and feasibility. And so I guess one of the questions, and there's many in terms of concerns and risks and that sort of thing. I mean, what I do sort of recognize is our kind of funding stream is much different than, private equity or whatnot. I mean, we're a municipality, we fund by taxes and, bonds and things like that. But, so it's different for us. But in terms of like environmental impacts, ones that would be kind of in the nature of unintended consequences and like kind of choice in design, choice of process, what's some of the biggest ones that really should we be concerned about as we kind of look at different, suppliers of pyrolysis type of equipment?
In terms of your equipment provider?
Well, yeah. So I mean, for us, I mean, it's really kind of as I said, a feasibility study. So we're looking at really kind of the pieces of process that would lead to a pyrolysis and a biochar product. So for us, it means like handling technology, drying technology, mixing technology, to be able to combine biosolids and for example, wood chips and try to achieve a certain, moisture content as a requirement for going into pyrolysis. But, again, at the end of the day, I mean, something that I think is potentially very valuable for us is kind of carbon credits and sort of end application uses. And so from that standpoint, we're trying to look at this very technically, but also economically as like, what is the best quality biochar that we can produce, which is obviously going to be very process dependent. That's going to give us the most flexibility in terms of what our ultimate end game is. And I'll just be clear, one of our simple end games is to, one, take away the risks of biosolids, which in Wisconsin, a Midwest state, we would have spread this. We would have carted this by transport, a great distance away from our city, and we would have found a farmer or some sort of agricultural operation would have taken this and would have spread this on their fields. Again, there's a very high risk to that, but what would be a nice, what pyrolysis offers us is to be able to take that biosolids, convert to biochar, and then we would simply just take that to our landfill, a mile away and save a very large amount of money in transportation costs. So that's a very simple kind of design of what we could get out of it, but there's obviously much more possible if we could feed into certain applications like carbon credits or things like dairy or a nutritional feed or carbon filtration or something like that. There does seem to be high value applications if the biochar is of a certain quality and character.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are probably folks on this webinar better equipped than I am to comment on sort of the processing challenges of taking that what sounds like a sort of a mixed feedstock and processing it into biochar. In my experience, sort of airflow, moisture content, particle size, that's all absolutely essential to successful sort of pyrolysis processes. But what comes out of the other end, if you are successful in sort of in producing biochar, it needs to conform with the quality sort of eligibility thresholds, which you'll find in EBC or the IBI, which will in turn determine what you can do with it, whether you can, at the highest grade, feed it to cattle, at the lowest grade, stick it into asphalt or concrete. And so biosolids probably going to have heavy metals in them. And so that might mean that your sort of end use application is probably not going to be onto agricultural soil. And so you just need, the guidelines are very helpful in terms of once you've got that sort of physical and chemical analysis, you can then match that up against what are the eligible end use applications. You might want to look at a methodology which Puro has just produced, which allows you to stick the stuff into a hole in the ground. Is it Puro or is it isometric? It might actually be isometric, actually. And so you can stick this biochar into landfill sites, and which takes away. I mean, okay, you're not going to get some of the co-benefits that you would do from putting it onto agricultural land, but if it's already contaminated with heavy metals because it started its life as a biosolid, then you are going to still get the carbon capture component and be able to credit that using this methodology. So there are an increasing number of routes through, which I think are incredibly encouraging, associated with feedstocks and value chains which sit more naturally in the waste system, such as the biosolids that you've described.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep, and we have a few more questions here. And Muriel, who originally had the upfront crowd capital, has a follow-up on that one, which is: are the markets exchanges are these markets and exchanges defining their own standards?
Short answer, yes. And so this is a very obvious potential conflict of interest. So, Puro, the marketplace, creates its own methodologies for the verification and crediting of carbon credits, which are then sold on its platform, which it benefits from a sort of revenue share perspective. Isometric has a different business model in that it's the buyer that pays, but again, they are creating their own methodologies, their own rule books. And so I've been involved in many methodology development groups. They are always conducted with a high level of rigor and with the participation of lots of different sort of industry players, including organizations such as ours. But I think without wanting to sound overtly commercial, it does bring into focus the need for an independent third-party assessment of your project to make sure that everything is being done to the highest level of rigor and robustness.
And we have a question from Katie. And can you discuss the inertinite a bit further?
Yeah, sure. So this is, I would highly recommend having a look at the academic work published by this chap called Sanai. And I'm sure somebody within the group has probably got access to some of his academic papers. What it basically does is it takes it's a new way of looking at the actual physical and chemical sort of composition of the biochar, and using different quantification techniques, and it's called random reflectance amongst other different sort of ways of looking at the biochar, and argues that there is a percentage of the biochar that is actually sort of permanent and completely inert and not subject to the decay sort of life cycle that the traditional quantification approaches have been subject to. So if you use Wolf et al. And his quantification approach, and also promoted by the likes of EBC in the olden days, what that basically says is your biochar is going to decay at it's either 0.3 or 0.03% every year until there's none left in the soil, full stop. And that's and so after 100 years, that's kind of okay, but after 1,000 years, basically there's going to be none left, and so there's not a very effective carbon removal solution, and it does penalise the project developer in their carbon calculations. What this inertinite approach does is using different quantification techniques, which Sanai argues are just simply more advanced. It says that actually a significant proportion of that biochar is never going to decay or decompose and will stay in the ground effectively, forever, or long enough for it to, geological timeframes. And as such, biochar can play in the world of these, geological timeframe durability, a bit like enhanced rock weathering and DAX and BECCS, as opposed to more in kind of the nature-based world. And so it is, and as a result, the credits command a higher value in the marketplace. And so that is why it's increasingly attractive to project developers and registries.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. Hugh McLaughlin says there appears to be a catch-22 between the technology risk and additionality requirement. Can you comment how this plays out in the real world projects?
In the what projects?
In real world, the actual world.
Hugh, do you mean that a biochar production plant produces outputs which generate multiple revenue streams, which challenge the concept of additionality? Is that
no? I'm really referring to the fact that you kind of have to build the plant and operate the plant to create biochar, but then you've already created it, so why would you be additional? They're saying basically the plant would have to go bankrupt in the absence of the credit sale, and how do you prove that?
Well, I mean, in your planning and forecasting and fundraising process, you are obviously going to your internal rate of return analysis needs to show that the carbon revenue is the component of that analysis that moves you into profitability. All biochar project developers that I know have to generate revenue from the other outputs as well. So selling the biochar, selling the energy, etc. And that's kind of a given, but that won't necessarily get you to profitability. So I don't think I don't know of a world where a biochar project developer who intends to produce carbon removal credits would build the plant and do it anyway, and then attempt to get certification. That would have to be a fundamental component of the planning process.
So it really essentially precludes existing biochar producing pipelines, such as stove projects and other existing economic engines.
Well, it kind of depends. It all depends on the structure of the accounts that you're presenting for financial analysis by the verification bodies. But yes, if you are operating a commercial commercial pyrolysis plant, which is turning over a commercially attractive or viable profit without carbon revenue, then no, you would not be eligible for carbon revenue.
Thank you. And go ahead, Hugh.
That's not a very positive driver in the marketplace for additional facilities. It seems more like an economic, like an accounting exercise as opposed to an incentive.
Well, I mean, if you're considering implementing a new plant, then into which a revenue stream or from which a revenue stream is generated from the carbon credits, then I presume it could be a fundamental component of the planning process. Anyway, so I mean, we do know that there are biochar production facilities out there that have been operating in the absence of carbon revenue, who have successfully verified carbon credits, but they've simply had to organize the, I guess, the sort of the financial components of the business in a way such that the carbon credit generating sort of bit now is either standalone or has its own P&L, etc. So there are ways of doing it without having to just switch the whole thing off and walk away, and that's down to just the organization of the finances and the actual sort of business.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Bob Gratz asking, can you explain more fully what the compliance markets are?
The best example of that is the European ETS standing for Emissions Trading Scheme. The signatories of the Paris Agreement, which is the International Climate Change Agreement, have all agreed on a country basis to reduce their overall carbon emissions to levels akin to what they were in the early 1990s. And in order to achieve that, they have agreed of an overall sort of national sort of a number of emissions that they're going to be putting into the atmosphere, which is significantly lower than what it is right now. And that's called an NDC, a nationally determined contribution. Now, the government alone cannot deliver those reductions, and so they push these reductions targets onto the heavy emitting businesses that domiciled in those countries, steel manufacturing and just the heavy emitting sort of industries. And they now have to operate in what's called a cap and trade system. In other words, the total amount of emissions that can be produced by any single country and the companies within it is capped at level X, and you as a heavy emitting organization have your allocation as your share of that total number. Now, if you successfully decarbonize and produce below your number, you can put some of those allocations onto the marketplace, which are available for purchase from the companies that have not been successful in decarbonizing and have produced emissions over their cap. And so, as the name suggests, this is a cap and trade system, which is specifically designed to keep the total number of emissions at a level. It's a compliance mandatory market. In other words, you have to operate in it by law, and it is that is a kind of a market mechanism which is specifically designed to get those emissions down to levels which are going to help with the climate crisis. The role of CDR within that is that carbon dioxide removal projects and the associated credits are now being considered as an eligible carbon asset within those trading systems. So in addition to the allocations or allowances that you're able to use, you can also use some proportion of removals.
Well, that is excellent. We've had some really good questions, and Simon, this has been an excellent presentation. Last call for questions. I see some comments in the chat, but any other questions for Simon before we let him go for the weekend? Okay, seeing none, I want to thank you all very much for being here today. We've had some good participation and a lot of interest, a lot of people from Kenya today, so happy to see that. But a number of you from overseas and around the country, I hope you found value in here and continue to follow us at Minnesota Biochar Initiative's Char Talk. So next month we will be talking about electrical generation from pyrolysis. So it's another can't miss one. But Simon, this has been very valuable. Got a lot of information, a lot of clarity out of this. Are there any parting comments you have for the group?
Other than just to thank you for the opportunity to present to you guys, I'm a hardcore biochar believer, and so to be sort of exist and hanging out with fellow sort of biochar nerds is my sort of comfort zone. So thank you very much indeed for the opportunity, and I wish you all the very best of luck with your biochar related activities.
Wonderful. We'll see you next month, third Friday at 12 Central Time. Have a wonderful weekend. If it's a holiday for you anywhere you are, please enjoy the holiday. And want to thank Katie Meenan for her strong support with the administration of this Char Talk. We couldn't do without it. We will have YouTube recordings of this available on the MNBI site. Plus, we'll be showing up at other YouTube sites around as well. And let us know. Please email Katie. It's in the chat if you want to be added to the invitation list. And with that, I will let you sign off. Simon, thank you very much, and enjoy your long holiday.
And the same to you guys. Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Thank you all,
Bye.
and we'll see you next month.